Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Got a bit of breaking news here. Classic Game Fest, the awesome retro gaming convention that is in Austin every year, has been postponed to, so it was going to originally be in the final weekend of July. They've moved it to October 10th and 11th. Now, hopefully that will work out. Texas has been reopening this month. Just businesses have trying to get back to business as usual, so to speak. Just taking steps towards reopening safely as they can. But, cases of the virus have been, spiking to some degree with the reopening. That's not super surprising, but the state has been trying to reopen. And David Kalin, who owns Classic Game Fest and who runs it, and he's also the owner of Game Over Video Games. They've been, trying, just over the last few months, they've just been really, really trying to best serve the gaming community and work with the city of Austin and health officials exactly what to do about Classic Game Fest. They didn't want to cancel it before they had all the information they needed, and indeed they have it now, and Classic Game Fest has been postponed, not canceled, postponed to October 10th and 11th. I'm glad to hear that they've just postponed it, not canceled it altogether, and hopefully things will be doable in October. I mean, this virus will probably be with us for a long time, but hopefully at least it'll be doable this show in October. Now, Texas has been reopening, and so Classic Game Fest sort of, we're just waiting to see, how this was going to pan out with the, with the state opening up, with stores slowly but surely starting to opening up, conventions perhaps are going to be, happening again, churches and everything with social distancing. It's very hard to do social distancing with a big event like this. I'm sure that was one of the main considerations. And in fact, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about some of my experiences at Classic Game Fest. I've loved this show for many years. It's every year it's my biggest show as far as sales go. Austin is a very book-friendly town. It's always very high. There are these polls and everything and that they do, and just these statistics that Austin, Texas is a very reader-friendly town. Bookstores do well. It's a very educated populace. My books sell really well there. Great city for a retro gaming show, very enthusiastic community. And part of that is just Game Over Video Games. That's the chain that stores that is there. And, they run Classic Game Fest. And it's kind of funny. So Classic Game Fest, at first, when they first started doing their shows, they, certain store owners, other stores were a little leery of doing the show. They're like, oh, that's Game Over's show. I don't really want to do that show, or maybe they don't want me there because I'm a store. Well, David Kalin, classy guy that he is, he gladly invites other stores to do his show, and you can promote your store from your booth at your show. So if you're doing Classic Game Fest or thinking about it, check it out. I believe it's classicgamefest.com. There's probably still vendor spaces available. I really don't know, but the show will go on. There are definitely, badges available for if you want to go ahead and, reserve your spot at the show as a customer. So anyway, they did release an official statement, Classic Game Fest, that said, while we still feel confident that we could have put on a great and safe event in July, the reality is that by waiting 3 more months for CGF is better than risking a potentially smaller crowd, more virus risk, or should things take a turn for a worse, no CGF at all. This was not an easy decision, but in the end, it was the only logical decision we could make. I respect Classic Game Fest for postponing the show. We all love video games. We all love gaming conventions. And I really, really miss setting up at shows, meeting fans, selling books, autographing books. The money was nice. I love all that stuff. And it's really sad that all these shows have been canceled, but I totally, totally understand it. I am completely on board with Classic Game Fest postponing. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about just sort of my history with Classic Game Fest and Game Over Video Games. Now, as I told you, it's my biggest and best show every year as far as I just sell a lot of stuff. Austin has a lot of money, and I said, as before, there's a, book-friendly crowd, and it is a thriving metropolis financially. So just on a more personal level, I met David Kalin back in 2006 or 7. I know I did the first autographing that I ever did anywhere was at the 2007, the North location of Game Over Video Games, their main store. Kalin was a gracious host, and we had a nice little turnout. It was a lot of fun, and I just did an autographing there, and that was the first one I'd ever done, and he was kind enough to let me do that in his store, and that was really neat. I met some really neat people that came in to get a book, and the people that worked in the store were good. Even some, some of the employees there were really cool. Even some of them bought a book, so that was cool. And every year, I absolutely love doing Classic Game Fest. And early on in Classic Game Fest, like any convention, or most conventions, they start off small. These retro gaming conventions, they're a labor of love. And so it's a groundswell effort, it's grassroots, and you can't necessarily put on the biggest and best show from day one. So when they first started doing their, gaming conventions outside of their stores a few years ago, there were some baby steps, and, the first show, it was a lot smaller. There were only 3 or 4 vendors there actually selling games. The rest of them had things like pixel art, crafts, and things like that. There was, Game Over had set up a video game museum, which was really cool. But it was a fun show. I sold a lot of stuff. It was great. But some of the attendees complained that there wasn't enough actual game vendors. And part of that was just those stores I mentioned earlier that were leery of doing a gaming convention run by a gaming store. And those fears have been allayed. It's an awesome, massive show now. But just another thing that happened early in the life of Classic Game Fest, one year they had the music really, really loud, this video game related music. It's super, super, super loud in the same room as the vendors. And, you might think, well, that's cool. You can listen to music while you sell your products or while you talk to customers or whatever. But it was so freaking loud that I was screaming at customers all weekend long just so they could hear me talk. And man, I was hoarse by the end of the weekend. I had a headache and my ears hurt. But luckily that has been solved. That was just that one year I remember when that happened. And they now have the band and the arcade and all that, the panels, all that stuff in a completely separate room. It's a big, massive show with tons of video game vendors and all that stuff nowadays. And any show starts off and there's going to be things they change. And I remember another time they used to do the panels in the where the vendors sell items, and that was actually kind of cool because during maybe slower times, or if I'm just, doing whatever, if I'm not talking to somebody, you could just sort of listen along to the panel, and that was kind of neat. But the gaming historian one time at a Classic Game Fest, his panel was very, let's say, mature rated. He was talking about mature rated games, and there were some pretty uncomfortable moments during the panel because it was broadcast over the entire vendor's room. And so there were a lot of kids around and parents and everything. So it was slightly uncomfortable, but that was just, that was just a glitch, in the evolution of Classic Game Fest. I'm not here to bag on Classic Game Fest. Obviously, I wear the shirt, love the show. I do it every year. It's my #1 priority for shows every year because I've known David for a very long time and always do well there. So I'm not bagging on it. I'm just talking about every show has some bumpy spots, at the beginning. It's such a great show now because it's just massive. There's plenty of room for everybody. That first show I talked about where they had just 3 or 4 video game vendors, it was a very small arcade area, so everybody was packed around that all day, and people were complaining that they couldn't get up to the games. Way different now. Tons of games, just massive, massive arcade. So Classic Game Fest, I'm really glad it's been postponed and not canceled, but I definitely respect their decision for that. So I love doing gaming shows every year. Portland Retro Gaming Expo, Retro Palooza, Houston Arcade Expo, and on and on and on. This year I was supposed to do the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo. I was supposed to do the Midwest Gaming Classic, 2 shows I'd never done before. Anyway, with all this nonsense going on with the virus, and I say nonsense, I don't mean, canceling is nonsense. I mean, we're all tired of this. We're all tired of social distancing and wearing masks and using hand sanitizer and all that stuff. We're not really over washing your hands. I'm not saying we're not tired of washing hands because that's obviously essential to, general health, but over washing them and just trying to be so careful everywhere. But it's important to keep doing that because this virus, this pandemic is not over with. It's still a thing. Just because, you know, everything else in the news, I won't get into that, but everything else going on, the virus, crazily enough, has kind of been pushed to the background. But it's still super smart to be really careful as stores open up and as society opens back up. It is still super important to maintain social distance, to wear masks, and do all that stuff, you know, that the CDC recommends. All right, guys, thank you so much for liking this video. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. I've got a Kickstarter going on right now. I will put a link in the description. My forthcoming NES Omnibus book, if you could support that, I would really appreciate it. All right, guys, thank you very much. I will talk to you later.